The town of Ashton Ridge looked like something straight out of a postcard. Quiet streets lined with tall maple trees, white picket fences, children riding bicycles in the late afternoon sun. Nothing ever really happened here. People left their doors unlocked. Neighbors knew each other's names. Crime was something they only saw on television. And in this peaceful town, one man was known by everyone. His name was Daniel Mercer. If you asked anyone in Ashton Ridge about Daniel, they would all say the same thing. He's one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet. Daniel was charming, polite, always smiling. He worked as a financial consultant in the nearby city, but he lived quietly in Ashton Ridge. Every morning, he waved at neighbors while getting into his black sedan. Every evening, he jogged through the neighborhood park. He volunteered at charity events, helped elderly neighbors with groceries, donated money to the local school. To everyone who knew him, Daniel Mercer was the definition of a perfect citizen. But what no one in Ashton Ridge knew was that Daniel Mercer was also hiding something. Something dark. Something terrifying. Because behind that warm smile, behind those polite conversations, Daniel Mercer was living a lie. A perfect lie. And the truth would eventually shock the entire country. Daniel Mercer moved to Ashton Ridge in the spring of 2014. He bought a modest two-story house at the corner of Willow Street. The house wasn't flashy, but it was elegant. Clean lawn, fresh paint, large windows facing the street. Within weeks of moving in, Daniel began introducing himself to the neighbors. He brought homemade cookies to the family next door. He helped an elderly couple fix their broken fence. He even organized a small barbecue party for the neighborhood. People instantly liked him. Daniel had a natural charisma that made others feel comfortable around him. When he spoke, he maintained eye contact. He listened carefully. He laughed at the right moments. It felt natural, authentic. And that was exactly what made him so convincing. But Daniel had spent years perfecting that charm. Because the truth was, Daniel Mercer understood people better than most. He knew how they thought. He knew what made them trust someone. And most importantly, he knew how to manipulate that trust. Daniel's childhood was unusual. He grew up in a quiet town not too different from Ashton Ridge. His parents appeared normal to outsiders. His father was a school teacher. His mother worked as a nurse. From the outside, their family looked perfectly ordinary. But behind closed doors, things were different. Daniel's father was strict, cold, emotionally distant. He believed emotions were signs of weakness. Mistakes were punished harshly. Daniel learned very early that showing fear or sadness only made things worse. So he stopped showing emotion. Instead, he began observing, watching people, learning how they reacted to different situations. By the time Daniel reached high school, he had already developed a strange ability. He could read people. He knew exactly what someone wanted to hear. Teachers praised him for being polite and intelligent. Classmates saw him as confident and friendly, but Daniel never truly felt connected to anyone. To him, people were puzzles, and he enjoyed figuring them out. In college, Daniel studied psychology and finance, an unusual combination. But for Daniel, it made perfect sense. Psychology taught him how the human mind worked. Finance taught him how money controlled people's lives. Together, those skills made Daniel extremely effective in business. After graduating, he quickly built a successful career as a financial consultant. Clients trusted him with their investments. Companies trusted him with their financial strategies. Daniel always appeared calm, professional, reliable. And that reputation opened doors everywhere he went. But success was never enough for Daniel, because deep down, Daniel Mercer wasn't interested in money. He was interested in control. Control over people. Control over situations. Control over outcomes. And Ashton Ridge would become the perfect place for him to exercise that control. Because in a town where everyone trusted each other, no one ever expected betrayal. One of the first people Daniel became close to was a woman named Emily Carter. Emily lived 3 houses down the street. She worked as a graphic designer and had recently moved to Ashton Ridge after a difficult divorce. Emily was kind, quiet, and like many others in the neighborhood, she quickly warmed up to Daniel. Daniel seemed understanding, supportive. He listened when Emily talked about her past. He offered advice when she struggled with work, and over time, the two became close friends. At least, that's what Emily believed. But Daniel had a different perspective. To Daniel, relationships were tools, and Emily was becoming a very useful one. Daniel spent months building trust with the people around him. He never rushed anything. Everything was calculated, carefully planned. He knew that the strongest lies were built slowly, brick by brick, conversation by conversation. And soon, Daniel had become one of the most trusted people in Ashton Ridge. No one questioned him. No one suspected him. No one imagined what he was truly capable of. But then, something strange began happening. In late October of 2015, a young woman from a nearby town disappeared. Her name was Laura Bennett. Laura was a college student who worked part-time at a cafe near Ashton Ridge. One evening after work, she simply vanished. Her car was found in the parking lot. Her phone was inside, but Laura herself was gone. Police launched an investigation immediately. They searched nearby woods, interviewed witnesses, reviewed security footage. But they found nothing. It was as if Laura Bennett had disappeared into thin air. The case slowly faded from the headlines. People assumed she had run away or left town. In quiet communities like Ashton Ridge, people didn't like believing something terrible had happened. They preferred simpler explanations. And Daniel Mercer was one of the people who publicly expressed sympathy for Laura's family. He even attended a community vigil for her, standing among neighbors with a candle in his hand, looking just as concerned as everyone else. But what no one realized was that Daniel Mercer already knew exactly what had happened to Laura Bennett, because he was the last person who had seen her alive. And that was only the beginning. Because Daniel Mercer had spent years perfecting the art of deception, years learning how to wear the perfect mask. And in Ashton Ridge, that mask was about to hide something far darker than anyone could imagine: a secret life, a twisted obsession, and a series of crimes that would eventually reveal the terrifying truth. The man everyone trusted was not who he claimed to be. Not even close. And soon, the perfect lie Daniel Mercer had built would begin to crack. When the news about Laura Bennett's disappearance first spread across the small communities surrounding Ashton Ridge, most people felt uneasy for a few days. Then life slowly returned to normal. That's what usually happens in quiet towns. People talk about something tragic for a while. They worry. They speculate. And eventually, they move on. But Daniel Mercer never moved on, because Daniel Mercer knew exactly where Laura Bennett was. And more importantly, he knew that no one would ever find her. On the night Laura disappeared, the weather had been unusually cold. The cafe where Laura worked closed at 9 p.m. Most of the staff had already left by the time she finished cleaning the counter. Laura grabbed her bag and stepped outside into the empty parking lot. Her car sat alone under a flickering streetlight. She walked toward it quickly, rubbing her hands together to stay warm. That's when she heard a voice behind her. Long night. Laura turned. Standing a few feet away was a well-dressed man in a dark coat. He looked familiar. She had seen him at the cafe before. He sometimes came in during the afternoons, always polite, always calm. His name was Daniel. Yeah, Laura said with a tired smile. You could say that. Daniel walked a little closer, keeping his tone casual. I hope you don't mind me asking, but do you know if there's a gas station nearby, still open? Laura nodded. There's one about 2 miles down the road. Daniel sighed. Thank you. My car ran out of gas earlier. I've been walking for a while. Laura hesitated for a moment. She looked at Daniel again. He didn't look threatening. He looked like any other professional businessman. Calm, friendly, trustworthy. And that's exactly how Daniel wanted to appear. Actually, Laura said, unlocking her car door, I can give you a ride if you want. Daniel smiled warmly. That would be really helpful. Laura had no idea that at that exact moment, she had just made the worst decision of her life. Daniel sat quietly in the passenger seat while Laura started the car. The engine hummed softly as they pulled out of the parking lot. For the first few minutes, they talked casually. Daniel asked her about school, her job, her plans for the future. Laura talked freely. She felt comfortable around him. Daniel had that effect on people. He listened carefully. He nodded at the right moments. He made people feel understood. But behind Daniel's calm expression, something much darker was happening. Because while Laura talked about her life, Daniel was studying her, analyzing her reactions, observing her behavior, and slowly deciding something that only existed inside the darkest parts of his mind. The highway lights blurred into long, hypnotic streaks. Laura shifted in the passenger seat, the low fuel light on the dashboard blinking like a tiny, insistent heartbeat. She glanced at Daniel, his hands steady on the wheel, his profile silhouetted against the passing darkness. "Are we almost at a gas station?" she asked. A slight tremor in her voice she hoped he wouldn't notice. The car had been running on fumes for the last 20 minutes, and a knot of unease was tightening in her stomach. Daniel didn't answer. He just took the next exit. A ramp that spiraled down into an unlit, industrial area. Warehouses loomed like sleeping giants on either side. "Daniel, this doesn't look right," Laura said, her voice firmer now. The GPS said the next station was straight ahead. He finally looked at her, and the casual smile he'd worn all evening was gone. In its place was an unnerving calm. He turned the car into a deserted alley, the headlights cutting a sharp path between two brick walls, and killed the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. "What are you doing?" Laura demanded, her hand instinctively reaching for the door handle. It was then she saw it. In the dim glow of the dashboard, something glinted in his hand. It wasn't keys. It was a knife. The blade was short, utilitarian, but it seemed to suck all the air out of the car. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Danielle, what is this?" "If you want my purse, just take it. My phone, my wallet, everything. Just take it and let me go." He chuckled. A low, soft sound that was far more terrifying than a shout. He turned his body towards her, the knife held loosely, almost casually. "Oh, Laura," he said, his voice a gentle murmur. "You still don't get it, do you? I don't want your money." Her blood ran cold. The alley was a dead end. The world outside the car windows was a black, indifferent void. In that moment she understood. This wasn't a robbery. It was something else entirely. Her scream was a raw, primal sound, but it was swallowed by the thick, suffocating silence of the night. The next morning, the sun rose, just like it always did. Daniel woke up to the smell of freshly brewed coffee. He stretched, the muscles in his back pulling in a satisfying way. He went through his morning routine with an almost serene precision. He chose his favorite blue tie, knotted it perfectly, and looked at his reflection in the mirror. The man staring back was ordinary. It was Daniel, the quiet guy from accounting, the one who always brought donuts on Fridays. There was no trace of the monster from the night before, no shadow in his eyes, no tremble in his hands. It was perfect. At work, the news was already spreading. A missing woman, Laura Hill. Her picture was on the local news website. People gathered in the break room, their faces etched with concern, whispering theories. "They found her car abandoned," someone said. "How horrible," another murmured. Daniel stood among them, sipping his coffee, nodding gravely. He offered the appropriate words of shock and sympathy. "I just can't imagine," he said, shaking his head. "I hope they find her safe." And as he said it, a jolt, a current of pure, unadulterated electricity shot through him. It was a feeling of supreme power, a giddy, soaring excitement that made his heart race. He wasn't just observing their fear. He was the source of it. He was the secret they were all trying to unravel, a ghost hiding in plain sight. This feeling was intoxicating, more potent than any drug. E had done Italiano. He had crossed a line that others only feared to approach, and he had returned, undetected, unchanged on the surface. But inside, everything was different. He wasn't just Daniel from accounting anymore. He was something more. Days turned into weeks. Laura's face faded from the news cycle, replaced by other stories, other tragedies. Her missing person posters, once stark and new, began to peel and fade on telephone poles. Their plea for information washed out by the rain. Life, for everyone else, moved on. And for Daniel, life became vibrant. The world, once a dull, gray landscape of spreadsheets and deadlines, was now painted in brilliant, vivid colors. Every conversation, every interaction, was charged with a secret energy. He'd walk past a police officer on the street and feel a thrill, a private joke shared only with himself. He was the architect of a masterpiece of deception, and no one had a clue. He started paying closer attention to people, not in a friendly way, but in a clinical, detached manner. He'd study the woman who sat opposite him on the train, noting the way she anxiously clutched her purse. He'd watch the young barista at his favorite coffee shop, her easy smile and trusting nature. He saw them not as people, but as possibilities. They were all potential canvases for his art. He wasn't a monster, he told himself. Monsters were chaotic and messy. He was precise. He was intelligent. He wasn't driven by rage or passion. He was driven by a quiet, intellectual curiosity. The question had always been there, lurking in the back of his mind. Could he? Now he had the answer. Yes. And with that answer came a profound realization, a moment of startling self-discovery. He finally understood what he was. He had read the books, seen the documentaries. He knew the word psychopath. It didn't feel like an insult. It felt like a diagnosis, a name for the thing that made him special. It was an identity. He wasn't broken. He was simply wired differently. And the most exhilarating part, he had gotten away with it. The perfect crime wasn't a myth. He had proven it. He had tasted the ultimate power, the power of holding a life in his hands, and then simply letting it vanish, leaving nothing but a question mark in its place. He finished his coffee and looked out his office window at the bustling city below. So many people living their tiny, predictable lives, completely unaware of the predator moving among them. A slow smile spread across his face. The thrill hadn't faded. In fact, it was growing stronger. It was a hunger. And he knew, with absolute certainty, that it was time to eat again. The only question left was, who would be next? Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more psychological thrillers. Over the next several months, Daniel continued living his perfect life. He attended neighborhood barbecues. He helped organize charity events. He even started dating Emily Carter. To everyone around him, Daniel looked like a man building a happy future. But Daniel was secretly preparing for something else. He began studying news reports about missing persons cases. He analyzed police investigation methods. He researched forensic evidence. Everything he did was calculated, carefully planned. Daniel wasn't acting on impulse anymore. He was designing a system. A method, a way to commit crimes without ever being caught. Emily Carter slowly fell in love with Daniel. It wasn't difficult to see why. Daniel was attentive, thoughtful. He remembered small details about her life. He brought her flowers unexpectedly. He cooked dinner for her. From Emily's perspective, Daniel Mercer was the perfect boyfriend, but Emily didn't know the truth. She didn't know that Daniel wasn't capable of love. Everything he did, every smile, every compliment, every romantic gesture was part of a performance, a carefully constructed mask, because Daniel needed people to trust him. The more trustworthy he appeared, the less anyone would suspect him. In early 2016, another woman disappeared. Her name was Asterisk. Asterisk. Rachel Kim. Asterisk. Asterisk. Rachel worked at a bookstore in the city. She was last seen leaving work late one evening. Just like Laura Bennett, her car was found. Her phone was inside, but Rachel herself had vanished. Police began to worry. 2 disappearances in nearby areas within a year was unusual. Detectives started looking for connections between the cases, but they found nothing. Laura and Rachel had never met. They worked different jobs. They lived in different towns. 2 investigators. The cases looked completely unrelated, but there was one connection they didn't see. One person who had crossed paths with both women. Daniel Mercer. Daniel watched the news coverage carefully. Every detail of the investigation interested him, not because he feared being caught, but because he enjoyed seeing how close the police were to the truth and how far away they actually were. Each time investigators announced they had no new leads, Daniel felt the same sense of satisfaction. The system meant to catch criminals had completely failed, and Daniel Mercer was proving it again and again. But what Daniel didn't realize was that somewhere inside the police department, one detective had begun to notice something strange, something small, something that didn't seem important at first. But sometimes the smallest details become the most dangerous, and that small detail was about to begin cracking Daniel Mercer's perfect lie. By the spring of 2016, the disappearances of Laura Bennett and Rachel Kim had quietly unsettled the region surrounding Ashton Ridge. Two women, both young, both vanished without a trace. No bodies, no suspects, no clear motive. To the public, the cases looked unrelated, but inside the county police department, one detective wasn't convinced. Her name was Asterisk. Detective Sarah Whitmore. Whitmore had been working homicide cases for nearly 12 years. She had seen enough investigations to understand something important. Murders rarely happened in perfect isolation. Patterns existed. Connections existed, even when they were difficult to see. And something about these two cases felt wrong. Whitmore first noticed the similarities while reviewing the Rachel Kim case file. Rachel had left work at 9:15 p.m. Security cameras showed her walking toward the parking lot. But after that, nothing. Her car was discovered the next morning. Locked. Phone inside, keys still in the ignition. No signs of a struggle. The exact same detail appeared in Laura Bennett's file. Car found. Phone inside. No evidence. No witnesses. Whitmore leaned back in her chair, staring at the files spread across her desk. Two disappearances with identical circumstances. That wasn't coincidence. That was a pattern. And patterns meant someone was responsible. Meanwhile, back in Ashton Ridge, Daniel Mercer was enjoying the warm Saturday afternoon sun. The neighborhood was hosting a small spring festival at the local park. Families gathered around picnic tables. Children ran through the grass with balloons. Music played softly from portable speakers. Daniel stood near the grill, flipping burgers for a group of neighbors. Emily Carter sat nearby, laughing with a few friends. She watched Daniel with admiration. To her, he looked perfect, confident, helpful. Everyone seemed to like him. "Emily?" one of the women said, smiling. "You really found a good one?" Emily laughed. "I know." Daniel looked up and smiled when he heard her voice. From the outside, they looked like a happy couple, but Daniel wasn't paying attention to Emily. Not really. His eyes were scanning the park, observing people's student team, just like he always did. Because Daniel never stopped analyzing others, it was part of who he was. Daniel had grown increasingly confident over the past year. Two women had disappeared. 2 investigations had failed. No one suspected him, and that success had created a dangerous feeling inside his mind. Invincibility. Daniel believed he understood the system better than the people trying to enforce it. He knew how police investigations worked. He knew what evidence they needed, and most importantly, he knew how to avoid leaving any, but confidence can sometimes become a weakness. Because the more successful Daniel became, the more risks he was willing to take. Detective Sarah Whitmore spent weeks studying both disappearance cases. She interviewed friends, co-workers, family members. She examined security footage from nearby businesses. Most of the footage revealed nothing useful. But then, Whitmore found something interesting. A small camera mounted outside a pharmacy near the cafe where Laura Bennett worked. The footage was grainy, blurry, but it showed something important. A black sedan driving past the cafe around the time Laura disappeared. Whitmore paused the video and leaned closer to the screen. The car wasn't clear enough to identify the driver, but the model looked familiar, very familiar. And a few days later, Whitmore saw that same model again. In the Rachel Kim investigation, a traffic camera 2 blocks from Rachel S. bookstore had captured a black sedan passing through the intersection. Around the exact same time, Rachel vanished. Whitmore's eyes narrowed. The car might be a coincidence, but it might not be. Back in Ashton Ridge, Daniel Mercer had just returned home from the park festival. He stepped into his quiet house and closed the door behind him. The warm smile he had worn all afternoon disappeared instantly. His expression turned calm, cold. He walked into the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water. Then he sat down at the dining table. Silence filled the room. Moments like this were when Daniel allowed his real thoughts to surface. The mask he wore for others was exhausting sometimes. Pretending to care, pretending to feel, but he had learned long ago that pretending was necessary. People trusted those who seemed kind, and trust was the most powerful weapon a person could have. Daniel's phone vibrated on the table. It was a text from Emily. Asterisk. Asterisk. Emily. Asterisk, asterisk. Had a great time today. Daniel stared at the message for a moment. Then he typed back. Asterisk. Asterisk. Daniel. Asterisk. Asterisk. Of course, looking forward to it. Emily responded with a smiling emoji. Daniel placed the phone down again. To Emily, that message meant affection. To Daniel, it meant nothing. Emily was simply another part of his carefully constructed life. Another piece of the illusion. 3 weeks later, another disappearance was reported. This time, the victim was Asterisk. Asterisk Angela Torres. Asterisk asterisk, a 29-year-old nurse. Angela had finished her shift at a hospital in the city. She never made it home. Her car was found the next morning in a grocery store parking lot. Once again, her phone was inside. Once again, no witnesses. And once again, no evidence. Detective Whitmore received the new case file early that morning. As she read through the details, a cold feeling settled in her stomach. It was the same pattern. Same circumstances. Same mystery. 3 women gone. Whitmore spread the 3 files across her desk. Laura Bennett, Rachel Kim, Angela Torres. Different lives. Different towns. But identical disappearances. Someone was hunting these women. And whoever it was, they were extremely careful. Whitmore began building a timeline. She mapped the locations where each woman was last seen. She tracked traffic camera footage, parking lot surveillance, gas station recordings. 4 days, she worked late into the night, studying every possible detail. And then, she noticed something small, something almost invisible. But once she saw it, she couldn't ignore it. In 3 separate traffic camera recordings, a black sedan appeared, not clearly. Not close enough to identify the driver, but the same model. The same color, and always near the location where the women disappeared. Whitmore stared at the screen again. If the same car appeared near all 3 locations, it wasn't random, it was connected. And that meant the driver might be connected too. That same evening in Ashton Ridge, Daniel Mercer was preparing dinner with Emily. Soft music played in the background. The smell of garlic and pasta filled the kitchen. Emily smiled as Daniel poured 2 glasses of wine. "You're spoiling me," she said playfully. Daniel smiled back. "You deserve it." Emily leaned against the counter. "You know, sometimes I feel like you're too perfect." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Too perfect?" Emily laughed. Yanlai, there has to be something wrong with you." Daniel chuckled softly. "If there is, I haven't found it yet." Emily laughed again. But if she had looked closely, she might have noticed something strange in Daniel's eyes. For just a brief second, his smile didn't reach them. Across the city, Detective Whitmore was making a decision. She picked up the phone and called the vehicle registration department. If that black sedan appeared in multiple locations connected to the disappearances, then finding the car could lead to the driver. And finding the driver could finally lead to answers. Meanwhile, Daniel Mercer sat calmly across the dinner table from Emily, laughing, talking, looking like the perfect boyfriend. But somewhere far away, A detective had just started pulling a thread. A very small thread, one that might eventually unravel everything. Because sometimes, the most dangerous lies begin to collapse from the smallest crack. By the summer of 2016, Detective Sarah Whitmore had become obsessed with the 3 disappearances. Laura Burnett, Rachel Kim, Angela Torres. 3 women, 3 different towns, 3 cases with almost no evidence. But Whitmore knew something the public didn't. A single clue had quietly connected all 3 investigations. A black sedan. It appeared near the location of every disappearance, never close enough to clearly identify the driver, but always there, always nearby. And Whitmore believed the car belonged to the person responsible. Finding the owner of that car wasn't easy. Thousands of people in the county drove black sedans. Whitmore had to narrow the list down. She began by focusing on the specific model she saw in the traffic camera footage. A 2013 black Honda Accord. Vehicle records showed more than 2,000 of them registered in the surrounding counties. Still too many, but Whitmore kept digging. She cross-referenced the locations where the car had been seen. Then she mapped which registered vehicles frequently traveled through those areas. The list slowly shrank. 2,000 vehicles became 500. 500 became 80. 80 became 27. And eventually, the list contained only 6 names. 6 owners of black Honda Accords who had driven near the locations where the women disappeared. One of those names was Daniel Mercer. At first, Daniel's name didn't stand out. He had no criminal record, no history of violence, no police reports connected to him. His background looked perfectly clean. In fact, it looked almost too clean. Whitmore had seen that before. Sometimes the most dangerous people were the ones who never appeared suspicious. Still, she couldn't investigate someone without a reason. So Daniel Mercer remained just another name on a short list. For now. Meanwhile, Daniel Mercer was enjoying another normal evening in Ashton Ridge. He sat on his porch reading a book while the sun slowly disappeared behind the trees. Neighbors walked past and waved. Daniel waved back politely. Everything looked peaceful. Normal. But inside Daniel's mind, things were changing. The thrill he felt after the first disappearance had slowly evolved into something stronger. An addiction. Each successful crime made him feel more powerful, more intelligent, more superior to everyone else. Daniel believed he had outsmarted the system, and that belief made him bold. Dangerously bold. That same evening, Emily Carter stopped by Daniel's house. She carried a small bag of takeout food. "Dinner delivery," she said with a smile. Daniel stood and opened the door. "You're my favorite delivery service." They sat together at the kitchen table. Emily talked about her work projects. A new design client, some upcoming deadlines. Daniel listened quietly, nodding occasionally, but his thoughts were somewhere else. He had been watching someone recently, a woman who worked at a nearby fitness center. Her name was Claire Donovan. She followed the same routine every evening. Left the gym around 8:45 p.m. Walked alone to the parking lot. Got into her car. Drove the same route home. Daniel had observed this routine for 2 weeks. Studying it, analyzing it. Waiting for the right moment. Emily noticed Daniel seemed distracted. "You okay?" she asked. Daniel quickly smiled. "Of course. You look like you're thinking about something." Daniel shrugged lightly. "Just work stuff." Emily nodded. She believed him completely, and that was exactly why Daniel kept her close. Because people who trusted him never questioned him. Across town, Detective Whitmore continued reviewing the list of 6 vehicle owners. Most of them were easy to eliminate. One was an elderly man who rarely drove. Another was a delivery driver whose GPS records proved he was working during the disappearances. Slowly, the list became smaller. 6 names became 4. 4 became 3. And then 2. One of those names was still Daniel Mercer. The other was a man named Robert Gaines. Whitmore decided to investigate both quietly. She didn't want to alert either man. Not until she had more evidence. A few nights later, Daniel Mercer sat in his car outside the fitness center parking lot. The street was quiet. Dim streetlights illuminated the empty road. Daniel's black sedan waited silently near the corner. His eyes watched the gym entrance carefully. At exactly 8:47 p.m., the door opened. Claire Donovan stepped outside, just like every other night. Gym bag over her shoulder, phone in her hand. She walked toward her car without noticing Daniel watching her. Daniel's heart rate remained calm, controlled. He had already imagined this moment many times. He knew exactly what to do. But just as Claire reached her car, something unexpected happened. A second car pulled into the parking lot, a police cruiser. Daniel's expression didn't change, but inside his mind, calculations began immediately. The officer parked near the gym entrance and stepped out. Claire noticed the cruiser and glanced toward it. Then she quickly got into her car and drove away. Daniel remained still in his vehicle, watching, thinking. The opportunity had disappeared. And Daniel didn't like unpredictability. Across the city, Detective Whitmore sat in her office studying Robert Gaines' background. Gaines had several minor criminal charges from years ago. Nothing violent, but enough to raise suspicion. Whitmore decided to bring him in for questioning. If Gaines was responsible for the disappearances, she wanted to see how he reacted under pressure. The next morning, Robert Gaines sat nervously in an interrogation room. Whitmore asked him questions about his routine, his job, his car, his location on the nights the women disappeared. Gaines seemed confused, frightened, but he answered everything. And his answers were via work, records, security cameras, witnesses. After several hours, Whitmore realized something important. Robert Gaines was not her suspect. That left only one name: Daniel Mercer. Back in Ashton Ridge, Daniel was preparing for another normal day. He buttoned his shirt, adjusted his tie, picked up his car keys. As he stepped outside, he noticed something unusual. A police vehicle slowly drove past his house. The officer inside briefly glanced toward Daniel's driveway. Then the cruiser continued down the street. Daniel stood still for a moment, watching the car disappear around the corner. His expression remained calm, but his mind immediately began analyzing the situation. Police presence in Ashton Ridge was rare. Very rare. Daniel quietly stepped into his black sedan and started the engine. For the first time in months, a small feeling of unease appeared in his mind. Because somewhere in the city, Detective Sarah Whitmore had just finished eliminating the final name on her list. There was now only one possible owner of the black sedan connected to the disappearances: Daniel Mercer. Whitmore stared at Daniel's file. Clean record. Financial consultant. Well respected in his community. No obvious signs of violence. But Whitmore had learned something during her career. Sometimes the most dangerous criminals were the ones who appeared completely normal. She closed the file slowly. Then she spoke quietly to herself. Let's take a closer look at you, Daniel Mercer. Back in Ashton Ridge, Daniel drove calmly toward the highway. His face looked relaxed, confident, just like always. But deep inside his mind, something had begun to change, because the perfect lie he had built over years had finally developed its first crack. The city's pulse was a steady thrum, a rhythm of ordinary lives playing out under the neon glow. But for Detective Sarah Whitmore, that rhythm was broken, replaced by a dissonant silence. It was the silence left behind by the missing 3 people, gone without a trace in 6 months. On the surface, they had nothing in common: a young artist, a seasoned lawyer, a retired librarian. But Sarah had a knack for finding threads in the void, and one name kept surfacing, a whisper in the static: Daniel Mercer. To the world, Daniel Mercer was a masterpiece of success, a financial consultant with a golden touch. He moved through the city's elite circles with an easy charm and a disarming smile. His suits were sharp, his handshake firm, his advice impeccable. He built fortunes, hosted charities, and remembered the names of everyone's children. He was, by all accounts, flawless, and that's what set off every alarm in Sarah's mind. Perfection was a mask, and she was determined to see what was behind it. She started by digging into Mercer's life, but it was like trying to grip smoke. His records were pristine. His background check a sea of green lights. No criminal history, no disgruntled clients, not even a parking ticket. He was a ghost in the system, a man who had seemingly sprung into existence, fully formed and utterly perfect. The missing people were just as clean, their lives ordinary until the day they vanished. But Sarah found the connection. Each of them had recently sought financial advice. Each of them had met with Daniel Mercer. This wasn't about money. Sarah felt it in her gut. It was about something far more sinister. She started interviewing Mercer's associates, his clients, anyone who had been in his orbit. The story was always the same. Daniel was brilliant, charismatic, a true friend. He made you feel like you were the most important person in the room. He listened. He empathized. He solved your problems. People didn't just trust him with their money. They trusted him with their lives, their secrets, their vulnerabilities. He was a collector of dependencies. Sarah realized she wasn't hunting a common criminal. She was hunting a predator who used psychology as his weapon. He didn't break down doors. He was invited in. He identified a need for security, for validation, for control, and he became the answer. He would mirror his victims, becoming the friend they always wanted, the mentor they needed, the confidant they could tell anything to. He would isolate them from their support systems, subtly at first, planting seeds of doubt about their friends and family. He made them believe that he was the only one who truly understood them, the only one they could rely on. This was a game of mental chess, and Mercer was a grandmaster. Sarah knew a direct approach would fail. He would see her coming a mile away and wrap her in the same web of charm he used on everyone else. So, she decided to become a ghost herself. She initiated round-the-clock surveillance, a shadow operation that Mercer wasn't supposed to see. Her team tracked his movements, his calls, his digital footprint. They watched him move from high-powered business lunches to exclusive gallery openings. Always the center of attention, always in control. For weeks, the surveillance yielded nothing. Mercer's life was an open book, but every page was meticulously curated. There were no secret meetings, no suspicious transactions. He was either innocent, or he was better at this game than she could have ever imagined. Sarah felt the pressure mounting from her superiors. She was sinking resources into a hunch, chasing a phantom based on a gut feeling. But she couldn't let it go. The faces of the missing haunted her sleep. Then, one rainy Tuesday, something shifted. A surveillance officer noted a change in Mercer's routine. He started taking a different route home from work. A winding, indirect path through quiet residential streets. He would park his car for a few minutes, seemingly doing nothing before driving on. It was a classic counter-surveillance maneuver. He was checking for a tail. He knew. The realization sent a chill down Sarah's spine. She had underestimated his awareness. The flawless facade wasn't just for his victims. It was for everyone. He was always performing, always watching the audience. The game had just become infinitely more dangerous. Mercer wasn't just a manipulator. He was paranoid, intelligent, and now he was on alert. Sarah knew he would start making moves to cover his tracks, to test the boundaries of whoever was watching him. She had to get ahead of him. She pulled her team back slightly, making their presence less obvious, turning their surveillance into a delicate dance. She had to let Mercer believe he had shaken them, that he was safe again. It was time to go back to the victims. Sarah spent days poring over every detail of their lives again, looking for the one mistake Mercer might have made, the one loose thread in his perfect tapestry. And then she found it. The young artist, Maria Flores, the first to disappear. Her friends had mentioned she was working on a special commission for a private client just before she vanished. A client who insisted on anonymity and paid handsomely in cash. Maria had been excited, seeing it as her big break. She'd mentioned the client had a very specific vision, a love for classical mythology. Sarah cross-referenced this with her files on Mercer. In a magazine profile from 2 years prior, he'd talked about his passion for collecting art, specifically sculptures inspired by Greek myths. It was thin, circumstantial, but it was a link, a direct, personal connection outside of the sterile financial consultations. He hadn't just been her advisor, he'd been her client. This was the opening she needed. She focused all her attention on Maria's case, the commission. What was it? Where was it? Maria's studio had been cleared out. but her cloud storage was a digital treasure trove. Sarah and her tech team spent hours sifting through design sketches, invoices, and chat logs. Deep in a forgotten folder, Tay found it encrypted chat records between Maria and an anonymous user. The user was demanding, controlling, their conversations growing more intense over time. They discussed the sculpture, but they also discussed Maria's fears, her dreams, her insecurities. The user was grooming her, drawing her in, just as Sarah had profiled. The final piece of the puzzle came from a single, deleted photo on Maria's phone, recovered by a forensics expert. It was a selfie Maria had taken in her studio. In the background, partially obscured, was the sculpture she was working on. And next to it, for a fleeting second, reflected in a polished piece of metal, was the distorted image of a man. The man was wearing a distinctive watch, a limited edition timepiece Sarah had seen in dozens of photos, on the wrist of Daniel Mercer. That was it. The direct link, the irrefutable proof that put Mercer in the same room as the victim, tied to the anonymous commission. The psychopath's fatal flaw: overconfidence. He believed he was so much smarter than everyone else that he could stand in plain sight and never be seen or got sloppy. He left a reflection, a digital ghost, in the machine. Sarah felt a surge of adrenaline. She walked into her captain's office, laid out the evidence, and made her case. It was still circumstantial, but it was compelling. She didn't have enough for an arrest, but she had more than enough for the next step. "I want a warrant," she said, her voice steady. "I want his phone records. I want to see every call, every text, every tower he pinged for the last year. He thinks he's invisible. It's time to turn on the lights." The judge signed the warrant. As the data started pouring in, the carefully constructed world of Daniel Mercer began to fracture. The web of lies, held together by sheer force of ego, started to unravel. The phone records painted a dark picture, connecting him not just to Maria, but to the other victims as well, showing his presence near their last known locations at the exact times they disappeared. The master manipulator had made the oldest mistake in the book. He had created a record. He had believed his own myth of perfection, and in doing so, had written his own downfall. For Detective Sarah Whitmore, the silence was finally about to be filled with the sound of justice. The hunt was nearing its end. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next video. By early autumn of 2016, Detective Sarah Whitmore's investigation had finally reached a turning point. For months, Daniel Mercer had lived a life built on deception. A charming neighbor, a trusted financial consultant, a loving boyfriend, but behind that carefully crafted image was a man hiding something far darker. And now, the cracks in his perfect lie were starting to widen. The phone records arrived 3 days after Whitmore requested them. She sat at her desk early in the morning, coffee growing cold beside her as she studied the documents. At first, nothing unusual appeared. Daniel Mercer's phone history looked normal. Calls with clients, messages with Emily Carter, work-related emails. But Whitmore kept looking, because she had learned something during her career. The truth often hides inside the smallest detail. And then she saw it. A number that appeared only once. One short call. Just 30 seconds long. The number belonged to Laura Bennett. The call had taken place less than an hour before Laura disappeared. Whitmore's heart began racing. Daniel Mercer had contacted the first victim, and he had never mentioned it. That single phone call changed everything. Whitmore immediately requested more data. Location records, cell tower signals, vehicle tracking. Within hours, a clearer picture began forming. On the night Laura Bennett vanished, Daniel Mercer's phone had briefly connected to a tower near the cafe where she worked. It was the first real piece of evidence linking him to the crime. Still circumstantial, but powerful. Very powerful. Whitmore knew what came next. It was time to talk to Daniel Mercer. The police arrived at Daniel's office 2 days later. 2 detectives walked calmly into the financial consulting firm. Employers looked up from their desks, confused. "Can we help you?" the receptionist asked. One detective showed his badge. "We're here to speak with Daniel Mercer." Daniel stepped out of his office moments later. His expression remained calm, friendly, just like always. Is there a problem? He asked politely. Detective Whitmore stepped forward. We just have a few questions. Would you mind coming down to the station with us? Daniel looked at her for a moment. Inside his mind, calculations exploded instantly. Police station. Questions. Something had changed, but Daniel Mercer had spent his entire life controlling his emotions, and his face revealed nothing. Of course, he said calmly. The interrogation room was quiet. Plain walls, a metal table. 2 chairs. Daniel sat comfortably with his hands folded. Detective Whitmore entered the room and sat across from him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Whitmore placed a photograph on the table. Laura Bennett? Did you know her? Whitmore asked. Daniel glanced at the photo, then shook his head. No. Whitmore watched him carefully. Not his words. His body language, his breathing. He says. But Daniel remained perfectly composed. Whitmore placed another photograph on the table. Rachel Kimmer. Daniel looked again. No. Another photograph. Angela Torres. Daniel shook his head once more. I'm sorry, Detective. I've never seen any of these women. Whitmore leaned back slightly. Then she placed a document on the table. Phone records. Then maybe you can explain this, she said. Daniel's eyes moved toward the paper for the first time during the conversation. Something changed, just for a fraction of a second. His eyes narrowed. Whitmore spoke calmly. You called Laura Bennett the night she disappeared. Silence filled the room. Daniel's mind began moving rapidly. Analyzing, calculating, planning. But the evidence on the table told him something important. The investigation had advanced further than he expected. Still, he maintained his composure. I meet a lot of people, Daniel said slowly. Maybe she was, reclined Whitmore. Didn't he respond immediately? Instead, she placed another piece of evidence on the table. A still image from a security camera, a black sedan near the cafe. Daniel's car. Now Daniel understood something. The walls were closing in. Whitmore leaned forward. You were seen talking to her in the parking lot. Daniel stayed silent. You called our phone. Silence. Your car was near the scene. Still, nothing. Whitmore studied him carefully. Most suspects eventually became nervous, angry, defensive. But Daniel Mercer remained calm. Almost curious. And then Daniel did something unexpected. He smiled. Whitmore frowned slightly. What's funny? She asked. Daniel leaned back in his chair. You're very smart, Detective, he said quietly, but you're still missing something. Whitmore remained silent. Daniel's smile widened slightly. You can't prove anything. Whitmore knew he was right. Not yet. The evidence suggested Daniel was involved, but it wasn't enough to charge him with murder. Still, she had one more card to play. Whitmore slid a final photograph across the table. But this one was different. It wasn't a victim. It was Asterisk. Asterisk Emily Carter. Asterisk. Asterisk Daniel's girlfriend. Whitmore spoke softly. We're bringing her in next. Daniel's smile slowly faded. For the first time during the interrogation, Daniel Mercer felt something unfamiliar. Precious Emily didn't know anything about his crimes, but she knew his habits, his routines. If police questioned her long enough, she might reveal something unexpected, and unexpected details could become evidence. Daniel stared at the photograph of Emily. For nearly 10 seconds, he said nothing. Then he sighed quietly and looked back at Whitmore. You're not going to stop, are you? Whitmore shook her head. No. Daniel remained silent for another moment. Then he said something that changed the entire investigation. You want the truth. Whitmore nodded slowly. Yes. Daniel leaned forward, and for the first time, the mask disappeared. His voice became colder. almost emotionless. They trusted me, he said quietly. Whitmore felt a chill run down her spine. Daniel continued, people always trust the wrong person. Whitmore didn't interrupt. Daniel's eyes looked distant now, as if he were remembering something. They thought I was helping them, he said. They thought I cared. Whitmore asked carefully, why did you do it? Daniel shrugged slightly. No reason. Whitmore frowned. No reason. Daniel looked directly into her eyes, because I could. Silence filled the interrogation room. Over the next several hours, Daniel Mercer confessed to everything. Loda Bennett, Rachel Keem, Angela Torres, 3 victims. 3 carefully planned crimes, each one executed with patience and precision, each one hidden behind the mask of a perfect citizen. Search teams later discovered the locations where Daniel had buried the bodies, hidden deep inside a forest area nearly 30 miles from Ashton Ridge. The evidence was undeniable. The man everyone trusted had been a serial killer. The arrest shocked the entire community. Neighbors refused to believe it at first. He helped my family, one woman said. He seemed so kind, another neighbor said. Emily Carter was devastated. The man she thought she loved had never truly existed. Daniel Mercer had been nothing more than a carefully constructed illusion. A perfect lie. During his trial, psychologists studied Daniel Mercer for months. Their final conclusion was chilling. Daniel Mercer displayed classic traits of asterisk psychopathy, lack of empathy, extreme manipulation skills, complete emotional detachment. To Danya, people were not human beings. They were objects, tools, experiments. Daniel Mercer was sentenced to asterisk life in prison without parole, asterisk. Even during sentencing, his expression remained calm, emotionless, as if the entire process was just another observation. Another puzzle to study. Years later, Detective Sarah Whitmore would still remember their final conversation. The moment when Daniel Mercer's mask finally disappeared and the terrifying truth revealed itself. Because sometimes, the most dangerous criminals aren't the ones who look frightening. They're the ones who look perfect. The ones who smile. The ones everyone trusts. The ones hiding behind asterisk perfect lie. Asterisk.